All right. Welcome to the Manifestor Only podcast. Today I have Nina, a 4/6 emotional manifester, and I am so ready to dive in. Welcome, Nina.
Yay, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be on the show and to see what comes up when we start getting in a flow.
Oh, yeah. So, how about you start telling people a little bit about your human design and maybe a little bit about how you found human design and whatever feels natural to share about who you are?
Yeah, so I discovered human design like 4 or 5 years ago, or someone was trying to tell me about it, and I was not open to it at all. I was at an ayahuasca retreat, and someone was telling me about it, and they came to me like on 3 or 4 separate occasions and was like, "You really need to look up human design," and I was like, get out of my space. But I wrote it down on my phone and I eventually looked it up and it was like, oh, you're a manifestor. And I was like, I've never manifested anything in my life. Like, what does this mean? And that's obviously not what a manifestor means in human design. So about a month or two after that, I looked up human design again and I was like, oh, maybe there's something to this. And I mentioned something to my best friends and my one best friend, she was like, "Oh yeah, I know about human design. I parent my kids based on it. I work with my employees like based on their designs." And I was like, "What?" Like it totally blew me out of the water. And so at the time, I was dating a 4/6 splenic projector, and we ended up going and doing like a joint reading with I can't remember who it was, someone popular in the human design space. She's a generator. But we were living in Washington at the time and we were traveling and we went to Oregon and had a reading. And that was the first time that like I think I cried like during that reading. I was like, wow, I feel so seen. Like this makes so much sense. And from there, it like helped me understand my partner better, helped me understand myself better. And so after that, I kind of just, went down this deep rabbit hole of really learning about human design because it was kind of like a way for me to connect with my partner more and to step more into these parts of myself that I was suppressing for so long. So I actually had an emotional manifestor human design coach for like a year after that because I was like, I want someone who has a similar design to me because I wanted to learn what it really meant to go through your emotional waves. What does it mean to be a manifestor? What's natural? Like, what are your experiences? And so that was really helpful for me to work with somebody who actually embodied their design. And that person, he was like truly like the most peaceful manifester I've ever met in my life. And so it was a really beautiful way for me to get more introduced into human design to say, okay, this is like a potentiality of what you can experience in your life. And so after that, I did trainings. I did a couple of trainings of living your design and rave. And so I got fully trained in human design. And it's just, I couldn't not talk about human design. Like it was just so intriguing to me because there's aspects of my chart where I think in my keynotes pattern shows up like 10 times. And so for me, I couldn't help but see the patterns and like see how everything was so connected. And because human design was such a permission slip for me, it was like I just wanted to share that with other people to be like, listen, like this is how you work and this is how you can expand and you can grow. And you know, being on the right angle cross of consciousness, it makes so much sense where I'm here to really go into experiences, improve on them, expand on them, make them better. And it's very much of like sharing that with the collective. I have that 35-36 and that 64-47. And so a lot of these aspects of my design, I'm like, okay, this makes a lot of sense why this feels so natural for me. So it really took away that shame or that resistance that I had about these things that I was doing and allowed me to do it more freely and be able to expand on that. So that's been a lot of my journey with human design itself. And for me, Raw talks about human design as being the mechanics, right? And so this was kind of a piece of the puzzle for me. I did a lot of plant medicine, like ayahuasca, all the plant medicines basically. And for me, that was great for expanding my consciousness to really see things from a different perspective, to know that it's not just this 3D reality that exists. And so once I learned human design, it helped expand that even more. And then when I got into, I've been teaching yoga for about 10 years. I had the movement aspect of moving energy through the body. And then as a trained breathwork facilitator, there's also that component of energy stored in the body and using your breath to release that. And then now that I do subconscious work as a trained coach, there's that aspect of the mental part where we have thoughts and emotions that are stored in our subconscious. And so um, for me, these are all different pieces of the puzzle that help expand awareness and consciousness and experience life in a completely different way that is not restrictive. And so that's been kind of my journey and how I use all of these different tools together to basically create more freedom in my life and to experience life in a very different way.
That is so gorgeous. I love that so much. Um, I tend to attract a lot of cross of consciousness people. It's my Saturn cross. And so I can definitely feel that energy coming from you of just like searching for those different patterns that need to be experienced, right? And I'm really, I've been watching you for a while, which always sounds so creepy. It's like we're both on the roof, so you know what it's like. It's like
Oh, yeah.
we're people watching, we're just observing, seeing all of the humanness down there. But what has that been like for you? I mean, we talk about going into the second life phase as a person going onto the roof, and how old are you now?
36.
36, right? So you're still in that, oh, well, we're both, I'm 39. We're still in that, start phase of, but also really grounding ourselves now on the roof. And I'd love to hear what that's been like for you.
Yeah, the journey onto the roof was very tumultuous for me. We can get into that maybe later. But to actually be on the roof, I'm like, I never want to leave. It's so comfy up here. And it's true, like I do feel much more grounded. Like it's easier for me to say no to things because like my body like physically will not allow me to say yes to things that I used to say yes to. And it has felt very foreign. Like it was I had a lot of resistance to it at first because I have that 35-36 in my chart and so I'm always like let's go do this. Let's have an experience, especially as a fourth line. I'm like bringing everyone into this. And now all the like physical things that I used to do, which was like I'm going to go bungee jump or I'm going to go have this experience in the external world. For me, it's been more of coming into my inner world and experiencing life in that sense. And so it has shifted so much. Like I have no desire to go and travel and do all the things and have these external experiences. I'm like, wow, there's so much inside that I want to explore. And so I feel like I'm more of a hermit, like than ever before. Like my fourth line still comes out, but I'm just the fly on the wall. I'm the observer. I'm just over here contemplating things, sitting with things, shaping them in my mind and looking at things from different perspectives without any judgment or like attachment to it. And so honestly, sometimes it feels like I'm in this constant mushroom trip because I'm like, I see the truth in all of it, but I'm like, do I need to make a decision? No, not really. But my body, my authority tells me what is correct for me because I've learned how to really tune into that. But it really does feel like, and I've said this before in my YouTube videos because I have some videos about being on the roof as a sixth sign. It's almost like there's this thick pane of glass, and I'm looking through it and I can't like touch things directly. And so I'm kind of like behind this glass, but I'm not necessarily mad about it. So it feels a little weird because I don't feel like I have like a deep, direct connection to things or people right now in my life, but I'm okay with it because I'm not necessarily interested in that. I'm more interested in just taking it all in and seeing what I can learn from it and how it can help me grow and expand.
Oh, that's so beautiful. And I think that's the big difference. My sixth line being in my personality, it's like, and I'm a 6 too. So I'm used to having that body that's just like, I'm not going to go out, bitches. I'm staying home, you know? But now it's just like that double up of just like, I am so okay with being at home alone in my own little bubble, just doing my own thing, watching whatever I need to watch and observing, but also that process for me being very mental of like, okay, these are the lessons that I'm going through. This is the experiences that I've had in the past that I'm now integrating and really understanding and being able to look back and be like, oh, I see why that happened back then. It was because XYZ needed to be learned now and needed to be integrated and needed to, if I didn't have that experience, then I wouldn't actually have the wisdom potentiality that I have about said thing. And, having that first life phase of just fucking up a lot of shit, I mean, I would put trails of disaster behind me as a manifester as well, just like not knowing my impact and just bursting through life and people just being like, holy shit, what happened, and being so oblivious to it because I truly still to this day have troubles understanding my impact and how that works. And so I found myself, struggling to go on the roof. I mean, I was 34 when I finally mentally surrendered to the fact that I'm done. I'm done with that lifestyle. I'm done with all these things. I felt like I was going absolutely insane. I'm like, there's people I'm not talking to. There's interests I no longer want. There's clothing items I no longer, just all these things that were just like cut, 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 out, 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 need to go away from this. And then luckily I found human design right around when I was 34, right when I burnt down everything in my whole entire life. And I was like, oh, there's something called a second life phase and I'm going on the roof. And so, for me, it was like burning down the coffee shop that I had started. It was cutting out, like, I would say 90% of the people in my life. I'm not a fourth line. I don't have that network, but it was all these people that I had kind of bumped into. And it really felt kind of depressing, and had it not been for human design coming in and bringing that awareness and that knowledge that was like, oh, but this is actually a natural process for me. I don't actually know where I'd be today.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm with you on that. And I think, and I was talking to my business coach about this because she's actually a 6'2" projector. Actually, all of my coaches and mentors have been projectors, which is totally wild. But I was expressing to her, when you go on the roof as a 6'2", it's like you're just more aware of it. And you have that hermit aspect with the second line, so it's more natural for you to be alone. But as a fourth line, as a 4/6 going onto the roof, completely different because we are so deeply rooted in our network and our connections. And so for me, that completely burned to the ground. And I'm still, even at 36, it's still falling away, but like the biggest aspect of it really fell away when I was like 34, and it was devastating to me. Like literally was not getting out of bed, and went through this whole spiritual awakening. And the process that followed that was learning how to be alone and be okay with that. And so that meant sitting with really intense depths of loneliness. But like knowing, like having the awareness of like, this will pass. It's not something I need to be afraid of. But as a fourth line, it's very foreign when you're dealing with that, when you're making your way onto the roof. And so I don't know that anyone really talks about that because, we're so used to relying on our network. And as a 35, 36, I was so used to having that chaos and then going to people and dumping my chaos on people because I didn't have that awareness at the time. And so it was like literally taking all that back and sitting with it. And that was so, so difficult. And so I'm really curious if you experience the intensity of that as a second line, because, you're more used to being alone in your own space.
Yeah, I think, I was such a great manifesting generator. And I really wanted to be that social butterfly. We're always trying to be what we're not. And in my whole chart, I have two fourth lines. I'm really not the influential networker. I'm just not. And so it was me in my first life phase was trying to be and was great at being everything I'm not. And so I felt like, you know, there's something wrong with me for wanting to be alone. And so I would just push that feeling of wanting to be that hermit and not listen to it, which caused a lot of problems for my body. I was really depressed. I had a lot of, well, bodily, but also mental health issues because I was not giving myself that time to hone my natural talents, to just be in my little bubble, to do my art, to do my dance, to do the things that I really love to do. But I always felt so ashamed of
Mhm.
wanting to be alone. And then, when I got a little bit older, it was just a little bit easier that I could just be like, oh, well, I just want to be alone. I don't want to go to that party. I don't feel like going out today. But it was still filled with shame. And it wasn't really until human design came in and was like, hey, you're best if you're allowed to just be alone and to be with yourself. And then I started doing that. And it was just that freedom feeling and that peaceful feeling of just like, oh, I can be myself, that permission slip that you were talking about. It was just like, okay, this is actually my natural state. And so the roof life for me now is amazing. It's awesome. Like you said, the big difference between that 4-6 and that 6-2, because, mentally for you, it's like, well, the network, the people, the opportunities, and then your body is like, no, we're going to stay right here. We're going to sit here, bitch, just sit down, be humble, and all that stuff. But I think, just allowing myself to really lean into the fact that I can be alone without being lonely.
Mhm. Yep.
I think that was like, okay, got it. Thank you. Download received. It's good. This is where I need to be. And I've had people around me in the past year who have been like really pushing me because they're like, well, you need to have friends. You need to have people around you, which is true, but I have my core people. I have a couple of best friends who I kind of brought with me up on the roof. It's like, I know you from my first life phase, but I trust you. You're my person. I'm going to continue to have you in my life. I have my husband who's an amazing support and is like, you want to be alone? I'm going to leave the house. That's perfect. And so I have this balance now where it's just like, I get to be that person that's just, I'm okay with being alone.
Mhm.
But it took a while to get there.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And I think that's one of the top things that people struggle with is that dialogue around being alone and what that really means and creating stories around it. And honestly, at the end of the day, like, when I climbed onto the roof and I had my spiritual awakening, I had to sit with a lot of that. And a lot of that was like inner child work of actually sitting with those feelings that I was most afraid of. And especially being an emotional manifester, you might be able to relate. I'm not sure what your childhood was like, but very much of like, wow, I didn't allow myself to feel my entire life. Like it was a curse. It was pathetic. It was this weakness to show emotion and to have emotion. And then when it actually did come out, there was so much shame around it. And so for me, the emotions came out in secrecy, like in with just me in my car in my home in a safe space that I considered safe. And so it was that permission slip of saying, oh, it's okay to feel. And that inner child work, I feel like is so powerful, especially for manifestors. I mean, for everyone, but for emotional manifestors who have been taught that their emotions and feelings and outbursts are wrong and need to be punished, then that's where like that subconscious work comes in because there's beliefs around you know, what that really means to have emotions. And then that inner child work is coming in and saying, no, it's actually safe. So feel it all. And so there is that part of that deconditioning process that we talk about in human design. That is part of that process. And you can bring in other tools and modalities to help you decondition in that sense. And so, knowing that it's okay to feel, it's not going to be like that forever. Because, it's like you have years of suppressed emotion that are coming up. There's going to be a time period where it just comes up and you're just like, okay, it just is what it is. But then eventually it evens out. And it's not going to be as intense because you're not afraid of it anymore. So it's kind of like going into the belly of the beast, like feeling it all.
Oh my gosh, yes. And I'm I love my mother to death. She is an amazing woman, and she is a sacral manifesting generator, meaning she's an undefined solar plexus. And we were having a conversation not too long ago. I'd like to say within the last 6 months, really. Oh, and we were talking about, because I kind of talked to her about human design, and she's kind of getting into it, and she thinks it's really interesting how you could say that about this person, you couldn't say that about me, and it's just she's understanding that there's something to it, right? But she said one of the most healing sentences I've ever heard from her, and that was, "I've always tried to fix your emotions, haven't I?"
Mm.
And that was just like, I just bawled and was just like, thank you. I mean, she did everything correct in the way that she knew best, right? There is no shame, no blame. I love my mother. I think she did an amazing job of bringing me up. And she didn't know that it was natural for me to have breakdowns. It was natural for me to have these passionate highs. We talk a lot about, these emotional beings, and like, well, can you deal with my lows? But a lot of the times for me, it was like, could you deal with my highs?
Mhm.
That 1222 passionate high, and with manifestor impact. And when I was taking James Alexander's analyst course, he talked about how the 1222 tends to lock itself in to a certain, we have this extreme range of emotions, like the depths of despair, God has, left me, and then the tops of ecstasy, and there's a part of some time in life where we just lock that into a certain range, and we don't allow ourselves to go to the highs. We don't allow ourselves to go to the bottoms because they were never accepted. And when I learned about that too, it was just like, oh, fuck, I need to get in contact with that high and that despair low, because that is actually part of my process. And so I would love to hear more about how you've used this subconscious modality and inner child work, and how has that looked for you to really heal that part of allowing yourself to feel all of these emotions, and how do you help your clients to do that as well?
Yeah, that's a pretty loaded question. There are a lot of different ways that I could answer this. First off is, with the inner child work, a lot of that is just learning how to hold space for yourself in every emotion that comes up. So I'm just going to get really vulnerable here and just share like an example of what that really looked like for me. So, you have these different waves, these emotional waves, depending on which channel and gates you have in your solar plexus. And so there are times where like you can feel emotions like building up, but you can't rush the release of it or the processing of it. So you're just like, oh, I have to sit with this until, eventually you sit down and watch a movie and you cry, or just like it just comes out of nowhere and you're like, you just let it out. And so there was a moment where I was feeling like that, and I'm like, I just want to get rid of this pressurized feeling inside of me. And so I walked to the beach. I was just feeling so angry. I was like, this should be like a calm experience. I have all my tools. I'm doing my EFT tapping. I'm doing my breath work, blah, 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 whatever. And then as soon as I got home, I was like, this anger just like burst out of me. I like threw my bag at the wall, like just started yelling and like saying all these things that I was angry about. So again, just like the power to use my voice. And like no one else was around. So, I'm like living in my own apartment alone. But saying all those things that I was angry about, which is not, I didn't really have a voice to do that when I was younger. And so giving myself that permission to just fully let it all out. And I ended up like in my bedroom, like just sobbing on the ground and just saying all these things, all these fears, like all this stuff coming up without any judgment. Like just being like, okay, like this is, I'm almost like a child that needs to process and let this out. I'm not going to hold this in. I'm not going to write about my feelings and whatever. I'm not going to go to someone and dump all my feelings on them. Like this is me holding space for myself as if I were a child having a temper tantrum, which I had a lot as a child, but was like physically held down and like suppressed from being able to process and have my emotions. And so that was like a point in time where a lot of that was that's inner child work to me. That's one aspect of, or one way you can approach or experience inner child work. And so after I cried, it was like I cried and cried and cried until I was like finally let it all out. And then I was just sitting there on the ground, like giving myself a big hug and saying, it's okay, like you're safe. And then like looking in my mirror and then saying like, wow, you're so brave, you're so courageous. It's safe to feel like, like once you really let all the emotions out, you can reaffirm these really beautiful things to create this safe space and to reprogram your mind. So, and regulate your nervous system after going through a release like that. So that is like an inner child, or a way that you can use inner child work in order to process your emotions, especially with that 1222. There's also another aspect where somatic breath work has played such a huge role. Um, and I want to be very clear that somatic breath work is very different than other types of breath work, because I did holotropic breath work where it's like there's a 3-part breath. It's very intense. You're doing it nonstop for an hour straight. That was actually more damaging to my nervous system. Than helpful. And I didn't realize that at the time. I was like, oh, I'm releasing emotions. This is great. But it wasn't teaching my body how to regulate itself after. With somatic breath work, it's very intentional. Where the first half you do breath that you can control and at your own rhythm to intentionally bring the stress and the trauma and the emotions up to the surface in order to be expressed through your body or your voice in some way. And the last half, you change your breathing pattern so that you're actually regulating your nervous system after you've had that release. So you're learning how to self-regulate at the end of it. And so that to me has been incredibly powerful as an emotional manifester to dive into that somatic breathwork space, because I don't want to say it's like in a controlled like space. Like I do it at home by myself. I've done it in groups, and um it's an experience. The more that you do it, the more you're able to let loose and let go, to the point where like sometimes I'm like, wow, I feel like I'm like having an exorcism sometimes, because like when you really fully allow yourself to just feel and let loose, like it doesn't matter, because it's your experience. You're learning how to feel safe in your own body. And if you can give yourself that permission, it's incredibly healing from that perspective, because once you come out of that, it's like you don't have those big intense emotions suppressed inside of you, like in your actual body. So there's less fear of what they are, because you just faced and you felt them and then you release them. And now you have regulated your nervous system and your body to make you feel safe and secure so that you can move forward in a much more peaceful and healthy way. So those are two really big tools that I have used as far as like learning how to sit with my emotions and to decondition the solar plexus as an emotional manifester. And I've noticed working with different clients and observing different types is that the emotionally defined people are generally the people that are the most emotionally suppressed. Like you'll see them like holding their shit together versus the people who have an open solar plexus or an undefined solar plexus. Those are the people they're amplifying. They just don't have that awareness. And so it's like totally opposite of like how we're meant to really fully express ourselves, because it's natural for us to feel. So that's my take on the solar plexus and deconditioning, especially with that 1222. And with somatic breath work, when I went through that training, it was very much of like, you can only meet people at the range that you have been able to express and experience yourself. And so what I noticed, we did these exercises where it's like, okay, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much can you express anger, love, sadness, grief, happiness, whatever. And so we went through these exercises where we were like amplifying it more and more. And I actually found that the happiness and the love, those were more difficult for me to experience more fully. Anger, no issue. I was like, fuck yeah, like let's go. So like I was able to go louder and scream, and like I had no issue with that. But it was that love and that happiness where I was like, this feels really uncomfortable because like, there was so much shame and suppression wrapped around that. And so again, another way that somatic breath work has given me more of an expanded awareness of where I can be more expressive and allow myself to feel both ends of the spectrum without shame and in a safe space.
Mm. Yeah, I'm just nodding the whole way through here because it's like, we talk about deconditioning our undefined centers, and it's like, dude, let's start with the defined centers. And like you said, us emotionals are more likely to have our emotions absolutely suppressed because it's not, I like to say that the rules of the world were not made by emotional beings. And so we have this society that's very much like, well, if you're expressing your emotions, or if you're having a tantrum, or if you're over the top, which they like to say, which is absolutely not actually a thing, but then that's not okay. And you need to stop. You need to calm down, right? Suck it up, buttercup. That's the way it's supposed to be. And I think that's just such a beautiful, you know, the solar plexus being connected to the lungs and being connected to the nervous system, being connected to that expansion of being able to breathe. And then you finding this breath work and somatic breath work to actually help you go through that. I mean, I've never even heard of somatic breath work before. That's like new in my world. I've just heard of breath work, but I've never really gone into it either. I mean, I'm not a first line. I'm not an investigator. I've just kind of, I do what comes naturally to me. But it's, I think that's so important because our emotions are connected to our breath. It's just the way it is, at least for me. And that's the way I've experienced it. Is like, I can feel like if I get that tightness in my chest, or if I feel like my voice is being stifled, it's like it's in my throat, it's in my chest, it's in my lungs. That's where it gets contracted. That's where it gets really tight. And I'm just like, yeah, that is my suppressed emotions that are screaming, let me out.
Mhm.
And then being able to do these both breath but also movement, right? Just being able to actually move that energy through the body through breathing. But you've also been doing a lot of yoga, which also has to do with the breath, right? I think it's
Mhm.
just such a beautiful thing. And I really hope that a lot of, emotional people, but also especially emotional manifestors who are on here, take that to them and actually really see that is it's like serious business. We really need to get in contact with our breath. Really need to get in contact with that creative side of movement and breathing to be able to actually express. And like you said, that love, that passion, I agree. That is so much more difficult to actually feel. I can go to anger, no problem. I can go to despair, no problem. To allow myself to feel the joy and the passion and the love for life that's in, for me at least, is what I've experienced of that 1222. It's just like, oh, thank God I'm, slowly but surely actually getting back to that little wonder child who just absolutely loved life, but then had a lot of people who told her to calm down when she was excited or to suck it up when she was sad. So
Mhm.
I think that's really gorgeous.
Yeah. And before I found human design, I was actually using exercise and movement as a way to process my emotions and disordered eating as well as a way to like control. Um, and you know, I do have an undefined root, so that definitely played a huge part of it. completely open heart center. So like there's so many different like not self aspects that we're playing into to all of this. But before I found human design and I learned these other tools in order to actually process my emotions in a healthy way so they didn't keep, you know, being stuck inside of me, like exercise was almost like this temporary thing that I was using. But it kept like happening over and over again. So it was like, oh, I'd have to go and exercise to let go a bunch of this energy, this emotional energy that was like stored in my body. And it was helpful. But I'm also a manifestor. I don't have a defined sacral. Like I don't have a defined root. And so it just wasn't sustainable for me. So, you know, my routine in my 20s was I would work anywhere between 40 to 60 hours a week, but I would be getting up at 4 in the morning to teach a yoga class and then going into work and then coming back and doing consulting or contract work after my full-time job and then like working out or going for a run at night. And so it was just like this nonstop thing where, you know, I would get up and go for a 5 mile run and then do an hour and a half of Ashtanga yoga after. And then it'd be like, okay, I'm so depleted of energy, but at least I don't have that pressurized like feeling in my body of these emotions. And so that was a way for me to deal with it, but that's not a sustainable way. You can use exercise and yoga and all of that as a way to help. And yoga and using the breath was a beautiful introduction for me to get more connected with my body and understand the energetics of that and how that's actually really beneficial for me, but it was more like an intro as to like leading into all the other work that I do now. But that is something that I wanted to share because it can be over exercise can be like a huge distraction from actually dealing and processing your emotions in a different way.
Great point. And I think a lot of people need to hear that because it's easy to bypass it, right? I mean, it's easy to just distract. I did it like seriously on whatever day. I had an exam on Wednesday, like 2 days ago. I had an exam because I'm going to school for HR because the world wants me to have a silly piece of paper to tell them that I know what I'm doing. And then fine, I'll go get that. So I had delivered this exam and I was really overwhelmed because the class has been, we've had 3 assignments that we had to deliver before we could take the exam. And all these 3 assignments has been very like question, 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 answer the question. But then the exam came and it was a case study, which is absolutely an open-ended question. I mean, I love case studies. I think it's amazing, but I was absolutely not expecting that because of what they had kind of built up for us to expect. And so when I delivered that exam, I'm like stuck with this feeling of immense overwhelm because I could get an A or I could fail. I have no clue. And so I just find myself jumping into a different task instead of sitting with that uncomfortableness.
Mm.
Right. I was just like, I'm just going to jump in. I'm going to make myself busy here. And the same with like running or doing yoga or just, not sitting with it. I think I mean, it's a lesson I'm still learning. And so I had to catch myself being like, I don't, I don't actually have energy to do this right now. I'm doing this because I don't want to feel what I'm feeling.
Mm-hmm.
And then I could be like, oh, okay, I'm aware of that now. So I'm going to shut my computer down and I'm going to go sit in my room on my bed and I'm going to cry. And it's going to be okay. And I think, I really loved what you said about hugging yourself. And I do that a lot. I've just never looked in the mirror though. So I'm going to definitely try that and just be like talking to myself in the mirror. I think that was a beautiful little add on that I'm going to take with me because just allowing myself to feel that this was uncomfortable, this was stressful, this was intense. And that's what it's like. And then there's this part of me that's like, well, you're a 39 grown ass woman. You should be able to deal with this, right? It's like, it's emotions, it's chemical, it's just the way it is. It's mechanics. It's going to be there. I'm going to be overwhelmed from time to time. And unless I allow myself to feel that, it's going to come again and again and again with full fucking force.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah, and uh, we have to tell ourselves that we were not taught this. That was not mirrored to us in our environment. So even though it might feel like common sense to somebody else, that that may not be common sense to someone like you or me because we didn't have that role model for us. Like we don't know anything different. And so that's where, again, the inner child work really comes in because you learn how to give yourself so much grace. Like when those thoughts come up and say, oh, I should feel this, or you're being really hard on yourself. That's when you're just like, this is just where I'm at. Like I developed this mantra of like, I am who I am where I am, and it's more than okay. And so that was something that I really started to repeat to myself the last few years of when I was in uncomfortable situations and I was being really hard on myself when, putting other people on a pedestal and being like, they have it figured out, or they're smarter than me, or they're much better at this than me. And I'm like this loser, or like this person who can't control her emotions or whatever. It was just like, no, like I am accepting of who I am and where I'm at right now. And knowing that this is okay. Like this is more than okay. I'm still lovable. I'm still like worthy of love and attention. I'm not less than anyone else. I'm just different. Doesn't mean that someone else who knows how to control their emotions or whatever is better than me. We are the same. We are just different because we've had different experiences. We've had different um things happen in our environment that they're able to have those coping mechanisms and those tools. Maybe you or I or someone else has not. And so that's where we really learn how to have a lot of compassion because, you have the human design aspect that shows you the mechanics, but there's also so many other layers of like, what was that trauma that you experienced? What was the environment you grew up in? What were you taught? Like, how were you taught to, you know, manage your emotions and to react or not react or whatever? Because, you know, I was in a relationship where I felt like I had to suppress my emotions. And he had actually grown up with a mother who was like me. She was an emotional manifesting generator. And so, like, he had learned how to cope with the big emotions and outbursts from a place of like neutrality and not really responding to it. And so that was like super triggering to me. And so, like, you realize like once you start to realize like people deal with things in different ways, it's not right or wrong. Like there's no right or wrong. It just is. And human design helps you understand the potentiality of why someone reacts the way they do or why they are the way that they are so that you can start to stop creating these stories in a negative light of like that person's a jerk or whatever because they respond in that way. No, that's just what they were taught. Or no, it's because they have an open solar plexus. And so they react in this way. They don't want to confront blah, 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 whatever, or whatever. Again, it's not a negative thing. It just is what it is. And that's why human design has been so incredibly helpful for me in my relationships and every single person I talk to, because it shows me that, that person has that. I don't need to take it personal. Like it has nothing to do with me. And so it's created so much freedom in that aspect to remove the attachment, because at the end of the day, it's just projections of my own fears and insecurities. And so when you inject the language of human design, you're like, oh, okay, like it doesn't have to be personal. It doesn't have to be this big reaction to whatever that person is, who they are. And I have the decision to walk away or to communicate in a different way, especially as a manifestor, like really learning how to communicate. And so that's been very empowering for me to look at it from that perspective, to interact and have more empowered relationships.
Yes. And to add on to that, I think one of the things that I've really taken from human design as well is like, yes, I do have trauma responses. Of course, we all do. A lot of that is around my emotionality. And then there's other parts of my emotionality where it's like, it's not personal for me either, right? That feeling that I woke up with this morning that's just lingering over me, it's not personal. There's not always a story behind it. Like with the exam, there was definitely a story behind it. Like I'm deconditioning my undefined heart. I am really, aware of when I'm trying to prove myself. And so, of course, that was coming in and showing me like, hey, did you do well enough now? Are you going to get that A? Are you going to, la, 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 la. So that was a part of that overwhelming feeling that I needed to sit with. But then there's other days where it's just like, it's absolutely not personal. There's nothing that's happened. There's nothing that's actually going on. It's just the mechanics of me being here to actually have the opportunity to feel every single depth and height that there is to feel, right? And to
Mm-hmm.
be able to see the gift beyond that of this might feel painful, but this too shall pass. This might feel really good, but this too shall pass. It's not personal.
Mm-hmm.
And I know you've been doing a lot of, or I know you have. What I've seen, you've been doing a lot of Joe Dispenza stuff and the subconscious work. And so how does that play into it? I mean, because you were earlier talking about like the stories that will connect to different things. And I don't know, I just have a feeling that that has something to do with the subconscious work as well.
Yeah, I mean, as you were talking, it really made me think about how, again, human design is the mechanics, and we talk about the not self, with different aspects of your human design, which to me, the not self is just thoughts. It's the conditioning in the minds that we connect to different themes in the different centers. And so that's actually connected to subconscious work as well, because we have that conditioning as children and before the age of 7. Like we're just like, we're in a different brainwave state where we're much more receptive. We don't have that conscious filter that's filtering out like, oh, I don't have to believe that. Like it's just all going into us. And so that creates a lot of that not self, and that is connected deeply to our human design. For me, subconscious work is going in and discovering what that not self is. So the limiting belief systems, what are the emotions that are in there? What are the stories that we are telling ourselves? So a lot of that is like reframing how you're viewing something, seeing it from a different perspective and saying, well, who told you that? Like, why do you have to believe that? Do you have to believe that anymore? And then the actual rewiring aspect, to me, like NLP and doing timeline techniques has been the most impactful out of like anything I've done. And that's basically going into your subconscious and going through your timeline all the way back, like generations, past lives back, and basically pinpointing like a belief system or an emotion or a fear and getting the subconscious learnings from why you experience that. And once you share that, you can let that go and then you can reprogram in a new belief system. And that has honestly been the most impactful out of any modality I've ever done, which is wild because I'm like, how many times have I drank ayahuasca and like, all the work that I've done is like in 10 minutes, my entire reality was shattered. Like I saw my entire reality different, like more than once. And so for me, that type of work is incredibly impactful and goes hand in hand with human design. And that's how I actually work with my clients. We go into their charts, we dive into their charts, I listen to them talk, I hear the stories and the beliefs that are coming up that are limiting them. And then we go through and we take that and we go through and remove that through the subconscious rewiring work and then program in new belief systems. And we might use EFT tapping to really anchor in these new belief systems or new identities, essentially, because there were emotions like sadness was a huge identity for me that when I released that, it was like, I saw my entire past from a completely different lens that was devastating, but also like very freeing in a lot of ways. And so those are tools I'm realizing like are really go hand in hand. And so I like to work with human design in that aspect. And from a quantum perspective of working and doing Joe Dispenza meditations, I've been doing his stuff for, gosh, I don't know, over like 2.5 years. And, I got into him in my 20s, but I didn't really start doing his meditations until about 2.5 years ago. And so this goes like super deep, because, and it kind of goes against in the human design community, what they say is like, we don't have free will. This kind of completely counteracts it, and really learning about the subconscious mind, kind of counteracts like what is being said, because again, human design can be an identity or become an identity for people. And so I like to look at it as like a stepping stone to expand yourself, and it's a tool that you can use to expand your self-awareness. But the quantum aspect of going into your meditations and going into the quantum space, or that field of nothingness, is that you're able to actually create your reality. And the way the subconscious works is, like, we can tell ourselves affirmations all day, but they're just hitting our conscious mind. It's not going to be, filtered in this new belief system. So that's why people do hypnosis and subliminals and things like that. But the ultimate work for me is like going into deep meditation, because you basically go to that point zero space where you're not in that 3D reality. You're actually moving up to the levels of consciousness or layers of reality that exist, where basically time and space don't exist. And so that's what the quantum field is. Imagination is another word for it. We're constantly creating in that quantum space in our reality. And so when we go into that space of nothingness, that is where we can actually create and manifest something. And so when we come out of those meditations, it's like we're basically shifting into a new identity. We're shifting into a different state. And so it's just another tool that you can use in order to remember your power that lives within you. And using that alongside human design, it's like you're expanding your self-awareness, and then you're going and playing in the quantum field and saying, what do I want? Like, so just kind of to give you like a path of how this all comes together is, I work with my clients. First of all, I have a method I call the ARC method. So the first step is A, for accept. So I really dive deep into human design with somebody so that they can accept and give themselves permission to really, really accept where they're at. Because when you remove that resistance, it frees a person up in order to expand and see things from a different perspective and to move in a different way. And after that, you go to R, which is release. So you're releasing that conditioning, and you can use EFT tapping, hypnosis, NLP, like breath work, all these different modalities in order to release all these things that are not you to begin with, things that we've been conditioned with. And then the final step is C, for create. So once you've really started to clear out all of that stuff that's not you, you're connecting to your inner authority, and you're really getting to tap into that and become more of a step into your sovereignty. You can actually create from a clear space. And so I weave in creating a purpose or a definite statement that's based on your incarnation cross and your values. And we learn how to actually create a reality with intention that's not based on the conditioning of needing to prove yourself from an open heart, or having to do all the time with your open root center, and you're coming from a more clear place. So that's how I use all these different tools together. And that last step, the creation aspect, is where I really start to use the quantum meditation. So that was really long, but that's how I kind of piece everything together.
I love it. It's not long at all. I mean, it sounds really fascinating, and I'm curious, like, do you have a specific story where you've taken yourself through that arc system and modality, and like what did that look like before and what is it like now?
Yeah, we were talking about this earlier, actually, before we started recording, about basically the spiritual awakening that I went through. Or, I mean, you can call it whatever you want. Basically, like, it's one of those moments where your entire life burns to the ground and you have nothing, and you're just like, who am I? What am I doing with my life? Like, and so I didn't know it at the time, but I was creating this method. And so I had been studying human design for a couple years before this happened. And so I had that foundation of giving myself that permission to accept aspects of myself and expand my self-awareness, so that when that actually happened, I was like, okay, like, I know what's going on and I can't run from this. So I basically went from a victim mindset to stepping into this reality where I'm like, I'm intentionally creating my life. And so I created this whole method. So, I went through this spiritual awakening where something happened where I felt deeply betrayed. And I'm not going to go into details about it, because again, it's just a story. It was something I created in my reality that took me a lot of time to come to terms with, because there was so much shame and regret wrapped around it. But basically, I couldn't blame anyone else except for myself. in that moment. And I knew it. And when that happened, I literally thought I was losing my mind. I had just gone back. I was taking a sabbatical from work and I was traveling around Mexico for 5 months and I came back and basically like shit hit the fan. Like just my entire world crumbled. Went and stayed with my dad. I didn't get out of bed for 2 weeks. I had this moment where I was just sobbing for like 5 days straight. And um not moments, like days I was crying, but like there was a moment where I felt like my brain was like splitting in half. And I had so much, it was like every single suppressed emotion I'd never felt in my life came up at once. And in that moment, I was like, well, I can't run from this. I've run from this my entire life. I went and traveled in Mexico for the last 5 months, and that, that didn't really do much for me. And so it was like, okay, I got to sit with this. And so in that moment, it was like someone had handed me a huge, huge ball of tangled up Christmas lights. And I was like, all right, I'm going to take this one by one, untangle. And so that was all of my bullshit, all of my stories, all my victimhood, like everything that I was running from, everything I was hiding behind, where I was like not, um, like in my power essentially. And at that time that happened, I was like, wow, I'm the problem. And like, because I was like, wow, my another relationship like hit the fan, like shit hit the fan. And I'm like, I don't want to enter in any other relationship until I figure out like what it is within me that is creating these issues. And so that's when I went into Gene Keys. I went through the Venus sequence, and that was probably one of the most impactful things I've ever done in my life. Like it completely changed me. I took radical responsibility for how I was showing up in my relationships and empowered me to do something different. And so during that time period, I would go for like 3 hour long walks, listening to Gene Key audio, sitting in contemplation, journaling for a couple hours every single morning, sitting in meditation, and just being with myself. And it was the most uncomfortable time period of my entire life. Because again, I couldn't run from it, but it was so uncomfortable in my body. I just wanted to crawl out of my skin. And so during that time period, I was doing, like I said, all of that. And then also I would do EFT tapping for like 2, 3, 4 hours a day. Like I was going in. I was like, I'm not running from this. Like I'm not messing around. So I did that for months. And it was hard because it felt like I took like 5,000 steps backwards. And I was like slowly making my way forward. But in that moment, I really started doing deep inner child work at the same time, because when that happened, it was just me. I was there. My parents are supportive. Like my friends that were around me were supportive, but it was just me. And I said, Nina, if it takes you the rest of your life to figure this out and to be like a better person, a better human being, like I will not give up on you. And it was in that moment that I made that decision that I was committing to myself. And in doing so, I was actually helping so many other people, indirectly. And that was the only way I was going to have really beautiful impact on people, especially as a manifester. And so it was that declaration of saying, I will not give up on you. Like it was the first time that I was like, no one's coming to save you, Nina. I was like, this is it. I was like, you get your shit together. It was like that bottom of the barrel moment where you're just like, it's just me. And so taking responsibility for that, but also like showing up for myself in the way that I wished other people had shown up for me, and saying I need to give 100% of all of this to myself. How I wanted my partner to show up in a relationship, how I wanted my parents to show up, how I want my friends to show up. That's how I will show up for myself. And so for the past year and a half, 2 years, that's been my process. It's been a very deep, mutative process for me. Hermiting a lot in isolation, a lot in like feeling my emotions, spending time alone, facing a lot of my own shit, doing all this inner child work, sitting a lot in meditation, doing a lot. So like all the tools that I've talked about, these are all the things I've been doing for the last 2 years to really clean all the stuff out. So for me, I look at it as like this ongoing spiral, like it never really ends, right? So I created this ARC method unintentionally. It was just like, I was like, okay, I got to fix my shit. So I created this process for myself. And so in that time period, I created a definite statement. I did all these things, and I was like, writing down, this is what I want and this is what I want to create in my life. And these are the characteristics of the identity of who I really want to step into and show up as. And human design was like so interwoven into all of that because I had a deeper understanding of like myself and what my strengths were. And so I wove that a lot into how I was creating my reality and being more intentional about it. And so that was the process that I went through. And it's changed a lot because as I continued to release more and as I started to do more of the subconscious work, then I started to see reality different. And there's like different layers that you peel back and you step more into your power. And the more like, oh, I was being a victim there. Okay. Learn how to forgive yourself, give yourself grace, whatever, it's the past. Let's move on. Let's move forward. So there's just a lot of like this doing things again and again and again and like screwing up again and again and again. And it was really painful to do that at first because I was like, wow, I've hurt so many people and I'm still continuing to do so. But I was doing it from a place of more of expanded awareness and like giving myself that grace during that time period, which now has allowed me to give that to so many more people because I've been able to give that to myself. So that is how I developed that method and used all of those tools because I first and foremost used it on myself. So I know the power of it and how it actually works on multiple layers, that mental, that mechanical, the subconscious, and that the physical body and that emotional body. And so to me, it's not just one simple answer that's like, you're going to do this. Like it's constantly showing up for yourself and doing the things that you feel called to do in order to be that person that you really deeply desire to be, and which is distorted in some ways because of the not self. But again, that's okay. Like you're going to be peeling back these layers and discovering new aspects of yourself along the way. And I think if we can look at ourselves and our journey as that way of like, you can't get it wrong, like at all, you'll have so much more freedom in your life. Like the world is your playground and it does get easier and easier and easier. But you gotta like filter out and not not carry around that bullshit because that's not who you are. So that's where all of this stuff helps to clean and clear it out.
Mm. Radical honesty and being able to actually see what we've created ourselves. I think that is so incredibly powerful because we can choose to be the victim or we can choose to step out of that. And, I posted not too long ago, I have a 3-part post on my self-help journey, and it starts with a lot of these, well, if I change, then the people around me will change. Or if I just say these affirmations, then I'll get what I want. Or if I just do, and everything I was doing was always because I wanted an outside experience to be what I wanted it to be and not to turn it into me and be like, okay, but where am I actually responsible for what's going on? Where am I, you know, taking things personally? Where am I creating a fucking story where I'm a victim? Where am I caring that I'm a villain in someone else's story? Where am I just like all of these self-help things that I was doing was always to accomplish something outside of me instead of going into myself. And and that's not, at least in my experience, that's not how it fucking works. You got to go in. There's got to be that radical honesty, that responsibility, that really looking deeply at yourself and saying, okay, you know what? I did that. I was there. This is what happened. And again, like you said, there's no wrong or right. It just is. There's no shame around what we've done in the past. Or of course we have this shame, but this shame is just fake. It's something that we need to understand. It's not going to help us in any way, shape, or form. What's happened. And now let's move on with that radical honesty of how I created this.
Mm-hmm.
And,
Yeah.
I, like I said, I burnt down my coffee shop. I was a franchise owner for a coffee shop and I was the first franchise owner. So I was like the test bunny. They really wanted to create a big franchise and I was going to be the first one. And we had all these, had all these different people around me who were calling me out. I'm a 6'2", you know, that calling me out for what I'm great at and all this naturalness. But I said yes to that, not because I was emotionally clear. I actually had very many little nudges of like, this is not right. This is not right. You shouldn't do this. But I said yes because I wanted to prove that it was good enough.
Yep.
But it took me, I'd say, a good year, because when I finally declared it bankrupt, I was left with over $100,000 in debt. And that was like, I blamed them, their fault. They did this to me. They did it. You know, it's just so easy to go into that victim role of they did this. And then it took me a really good year. And I mean, and even at the conference, I had an epiphany of how I'm still telling a little bit of a twisted victim story around it. You know, it's like a new level, new devil when I'm like getting it out. And it's just like, oh, wait, no, Jessica, you're actually fucking responsible for this. Own it. Own
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
And that's the hardest part that I will say. That's why not many people go down that path because it sucks. It sucks at first. It gets so much easier because we talk about like, oh, I want freedom. I want this in my life. You don't know. You don't know what freedom actually is unless you take 100% responsibility for every single decision in your life. And that's very overwhelming and humbling and hard and scary to really wrap your head around, especially when you've been in these, like you said, these stories, this victim story your entire life. And then when you can give yourself permission to say, oh, I can accept this and not die and like feel it and process it and let it go. And then just say, okay, I don't have to hold on to this. That's freedom. Like you don't have to carry that around. And also like human design, there are so many people in the space that use their designs like in order to excuse their behavior. Like, oh, it's because I have this about my chart and that's why I'm an asshole. I'm like, no. Like you have a responsibility to do this. When I found out I was an emotional manifestor, I was like, oh, that's when I really stopped spending more time around people because I was like, I gotta get my shit together. So like it's my responsibility to show up knowing where I'm at in my emotional wave and to inform every single person around me, I'm happy, I'm low, blah, blah, blah. So they're not taking that on, or this is what I'm thinking, what I'm feeling or whatever, knowing I have a defined head and ajna and saying, this is what I think. What's your opinion? Like, I'm open to hearing what you have to say instead of immediately like shutting people down. Like it just expands your self-awareness of the type of person that you can be and show up as and how you can really strengthen and have beautiful relationships at the end of the day. So use your human design as a tool for empowering yourself and empowering other people around you versus using it as an excuse to be a dick or a victim.
Hallelujah. Hallelujah. Yes, please. Thank you. More. I could not agree more. It is outraging when people be like, well, I have this, so therefore that. And that's actually one of the things that I wrote in the post as well. It's like, okay, we can talk about no choice. No choice. Sometimes these expressions will show up. My choice to be aware and do something about it.
Mm-hmm.
End of story. It's just, yeah.
Yeah, you have a choice. You have a choice at any moment in how you are reacting. And we're not robots. We're not going to be perfect. We're human beings who are like the small selves that are like these identities. And so we're not going to be perfect all the time. Like we're going to screw up, but again, giving yourself that grace. And when you give that to yourself, you can give that to other people. It just makes life so much easier.
Yeah, I think you said it well when you said, you don't know what freedom is until you've actually taken that responsibility. And when people use human design, it's a permission slip, but it's also not a permission slip because it's a permission slip to radically honestly look at yourself.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, because it's not a permission slip to be an asshole. At least not in my world.
Yeah. It's not acceptable behavior. And it's for me personally, the more I worked with human design and subconscious work and breath work and working with so many different clients, you and especially being on the roof too, just being an observer, I do feel like a reflector sometimes, actually. That is my design. On the design side, I am a reflector. So um I do find myself observing people because their behaviors, if they're not matching up with their words, that's a huge like indicator of like, okay, is this person correct for me? Do I want to be in the energy of this person? And like hearing what they have to say and the stories that they're telling, are they blaming other people? Like I was in some Facebook group the other day and a manifestor group, and this woman goes in and she's like totally shitting on projectors and how they're like screwing up her projects. And I was like, I'm very protective of my projectors, by the way. I was like, don't mess around. And so I told her, I was like, did you work through your emotional wave? You have to take responsibility for how you're showing up and how you're communicating. Like, don't blame and point your finger at somebody else and make a blanket statement about some other type. Like, it's just irresponsible. Like, don't do that. And so yeah, it's been interesting to observe and start to be more aware of how other people carry themselves and how what they share and the words and the language that they use. And I having that awareness and being on the sixth sign, observing that, it makes it much more easier to put myself in environments around people who are speaking a language that is empowering as well. And we haven't touched on this. I know we're like a little far into our podcast, but I'm a quad right.
Yes.
And I'm an emotional quad right. And my strongest sense is feeling. There's like, I'm an alien. Like, I'm picking up on so much more than people realize. Like, you can't run shit past me. You can't lie to me. Like, I'm picking up on your energy. I'm picking up the depths of your intentions. Like, I'm picking up on the words that you are speaking. Like, I'm taking it all in. And I am highly, highly aware as a sixth line on the roof. I'm taking all of that in. And so it's so apparent when people are speaking and sharing all of that. And so, yeah, I wanted to add that part in too, as like, you know, as far as discussion being a quadrant.
Well, yeah, I mean, you guys are constantly picking up on everything, and especially then with feeling cognition on top of it, which is, super alien and just like, and it
Mhm.
must be really, I mean, I'd love to hear more about, I mean, if you'd like to touch on feeling cognition, because I've only read about it. I don't know anybody personally who has feeling cognition. I'm inner vision, so I can shut my eyes and I'll see. I will definitely have a contact with the future and what's going to come or what I can sense in that way. But feeling cognition, I mean, that's just some super alien shit. Solar plexus binary, future rave ass motherfucking. So how does it feel, just being so receptive, but not only that, not only having this quad right, picking up on absolutely everything, having the feeling cognition, being able to just really feel the truth, but also undefined G center with the
Mhm.
hanging gate 10, which, behavior, right? It's like, and it's in your Uranus, and where is it? It's in one more place I saw, and your Saturn as well. So
Yeah.
this is just like, yeah, I love this combination. I think it's amazing and fascinating. So what's it like?
Yeah. It's sometimes it feels like everyone around me is like fake or lying to me. And not like in a paranoid sense. It's just like I'm picking up all of this and I'm like, why is no one else picking up on this? And it just yeah, like I walk into a room and I know right away if the environment is correct for me or not. And that's like paired very heavily with my undefined G center too. So it's taught me to be very, very particular about who I spend my time with. And like if someone's like, hey, let's go meet here, I'm like, nope, it's just not like I just know like it doesn't feel right for me. It's like this like like spider tingly sense or whatever you want to call it. It's like you just know something's off or something's right for you or that you need to go do something. And it was interesting because I went to this business conference the other day and I had this weird, it was like this very spontaneous thing for me. I'm like, do I need to wait out my emotional wave? Like whatever. And there's like this feeling that was inside of me that's like, no, you need to go. And I went there and it was very masculine. It was like 7 in the morning till 7 at night. And you had these motivational speakers literally screaming at you to like do this because, it's you have to like step into your purpose. And if you don't, then, that's awful that you're not helping other people. So like guilting people and like I'm like, why am I here? Like, what am I doing here? Just very, very different than, where I'm at right now in this space of my life. And just feeling how fake it was. I was like, people are just putting on a show. I'm like, are these people even aware? And it's becoming more and more apparent to me. Like feeling that and being in that environment as a quad right, I'm like, this is really intense. First of all. Second of all, there's not like an authentic person in this room. And I'm very, very mindful not to project. I'm there with a complete open mind. I'm like, I left hearing what I needed to hear. There were things that I needed to hear there. And so I like took what I needed and met people that I needed to connect with. And so like I see the beauty in all of that. I have no judgment towards it, but it was very interesting to be in that space as a quad right, as a feeling cognition, because I'm picking the realness and the authenticity of, the people in the room and the people that I'm around. And so that's why sometimes like I said, I feel like an alien. I'm like, how is no one else seeing this? Because it's so obvious to me. And I was so hard on myself for the longest time. Even the other day, I was being really hard on myself about it. I'm like, where are the other people who are seeing this, who are picking up on this? Like, how has no one tapped into this? And I'm really thinking that is a deeper, deeper part of being a quad right, is like seeing through the mask, seeing through that filter that's up that people think that you can't see through.
That's so beautiful. It's, yeah. I mean, feeling cognition, that's a fifth tone, right? So there's that judgment. I mean, the continuity of the lines and that being able to judge, being able to feel what is correct or not. And like you said, this authenticity that you're just able to pick up right away of just like, nope, people are not being themselves. That is a mask. That is a facade. Why is nobody else seeing this? I think it's beautiful because you're able to then accept, like, the start of your whole process. It's like you can accept that, yeah, this is what you can do. This is your superpower as a quad right feeling cognition person, of being really able to tap into authenticity and realness and know that, you know, I have my best friend's a quad right, and she will pick up on everything. And if she's not in an environment, I mean, she's got to define G center, but it's just that quad rightness and environment and being in that correct environment. And if not, it's just like the way she gets drained from being
Mm-hmm.
in that wrong environment, from picking up so many things that are just so incorrect for her and her, her being. And then she'll
Yeah.
be in a different environment, which is, good for her, right? And it's more authentic, and it's people who, and she also has the 10-20, so she's very much about the authenticity, right? And it's just like, it's so interesting to see how alive she'll become as a quad right, actually receptively taking in what is correct for her then.
Yeah. And I want to, so two things. Being a quad right, I have so many quad rights in my life. Like quad rights and manifestors, I have like an abundance of them in my life because as I like go deeper into my experiment, it's like I know immediately, and that feeling sense really taps in and like this is correct. I know this is correct for me. And the second part is the feeling sense. It's not just like with people in my environments. It's like feeling into, oh, should I eat this or whatever? I'm at the grocery store and I'm like picking up and touching different things. I'm like, this feels right for me. Like there's so many different ways that you can like use your feeling cognition other than like your environment and your people. Like to me it's almost like before I make a decision I tap into that it's almost like you're looking at a menu and you're like, I have this and this and this and this option. And then it's like, I just feel it. I just know. And so I kind of do that with like, and I didn't realize I was doing this until like the past year or so. I'm like, oh, this is actually like very intuitive and I should actually listen to this. So I do that for everything with the exception of like knowing how to differentiate that with my emotional wave and knowing when to tap into my authority for something bigger or whatever. So for me, it's kind of like, it sometimes feels like I have a sacral response with the feeling cognition because I just know. But then also being hyper aware of that emotional authority that I can also tap into. So there was a time where I was really learning to discern between the two. And it's much more obvious to me now, like feeling into that. So like really deepening into that feeling cognition. Um,
Yeah, that's a great differentiation there because it's like, a lot of the teachers that I've learned from, they'll talk about like, okay, we have our authority, which is, alpha omega, it's the authority, but that cognition does come into play, right? And so it's like you say, when it's like these, well, smaller things of like, am I going to eat this vegetable or am I going to eat that hamburger? Like, what am I feeling? What is feeling right for me in my body? It's like, you don't have to go home and process that. You just have this cognition, which will tell you what is correct for you or not. Sorry.
yeah, and it's been such a long process for me, like even becoming aware that that was even a thing and realizing like, oh, I've actually been going against what's naturally intuitive for me and then learning how to trust that. So like even being like I was at that conference all day yesterday or on Wednesday and I was there for 12 hours. And before I left, I was like, I had this feeling, this sense. I was like, I should probably pack some extra food or something. And I was like, no, it's at a huge conference center. They're gonna have food there. Their food was shit. It was awful. Like it was like none of this feels right to me. So I was like, I just basically like ate protein bars during the day, like when I was there. And I was like, like I need to listen to those little hits of like that feeling of like that sense that I need to do this. And so, again, human, we're still learning. Like, we're not going to be perfect. And so it's like little things like that where I'm like, oh, okay, it's safe to trust those hits, even though they don't necessarily make sense. In
They
the
never
moment.
make sense. They
No.
never make sense. I mean, the same with inner vision. It just never makes sense. And it's really interesting to see those little nudges of, like you said, just as small as I need to bring food. I have a feeling that there's not going to be good food, but then the mind comes in and it's like, oh, that's just,
Yep.
you shouldn't listen to that. But then it's like,
Yeah.
wait, no. And I think but that really is what I love about human design is that when we are deconditioning, when we are evolving through this lens, the easiest way to do it is looking back.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, oh, I remember I had that little nudge, I had that little feeling, or, oh, you know what? Yep, I said yes to that thing, but I'm not actually satisfied. Or, oh, yeah, I'm doing this thing, but I did it to prove myself. And then being able to step from there and knowing what that felt like, and hopefully in the future, be able to contact that feeling again and be like, oh, wait, last time I didn't listen.
Mm-hmm.
This time maybe I'll listen.
Yeah, and that's meditation, and not necessarily meditation, but just being in moments of stillness has been what has allowed me to really tap more deeply into that. Because, I've got that open root center. I'm like, I have that physical pressure on my body that's like never really goes away. And when I get really caught up in that and the not self of that, it's like, and like my open spleen having fears and blah, 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 like it's harder to connect to my strongest sense when I'm in those states of anxiety or like being like hyper like anxious or whatever. It's like I'm thinking I'm not being present, but when I can sit back and I'm like, okay, I'm gonna start the day just like sitting here breathing for 5 minutes. It's like, okay, it's gonna create more space for me to tap into that and be more aligned with my natural abilities within my human design chart.
Hmm. Gorgeous. I don't think I have more questions. But is there anything else you would like to add? to the conversation? Something that we haven't talked about yet.
Um, I mean, just what we were talking about at the beginning, again, I just use human design as a tool. And at the end of the day, like I'm a big proponent of the laws of the universe, law of assumption. What you assume to be true is what you will experience. And so it's fun to play in the human design space and say, I'm this. And then that's why I'm like the way that I am. Well, you're just going to continue to perpetuate that. So it's like, what are you putting your attention on? And so you can use human design as a tool to do the shadow work, but also to look at your strengths and to continue to expand on that. I know Richard Rudd and with Gene Keys, he talks about when you go through the shadow, the gift, and the city aspects of the Gene Keys, is that you only spend like 20% of your energy and your time on the shadow aspect. It's not something you need to dwell on. And so you can use human design in that aspect of like diving into your shadows and doing that work, but also making sure that you're really leaning on your strengths and how you can take responsibility and step into a more empowering place. And I really believe that, this is a lot of stuff that I've been exploring in the quantum space and doing quantum meditations. And I really love Neville Goddard's work, and tapping into like the I am consciousness of like that higher self, God, Holy Spirit, source, whatever. To me, they're all saying the same thing. It's like that's who we are. And then we have like the little self, the personality that we've developed. And so we can get caught up in this little personality and create these identities with human design and our enneagrams and whatever it is that we decide to take on as a belief. But that's what it becomes. It becomes that belief. It becomes that identity. When we remember that's not who we are everything. We are source. We are God. We are this infinite amount of everything. We can look at it through that lens as like, okay, this is a potentiality. Okay, my human design is a potentiality. Okay, here's a tool that's going to help me expand my consciousness. And then ultimately we can transcend it. So I'm not just saying this is me and this is the way it has to be. And that's why I love exploring so many different ways of expanding your consciousness, because at the end of the day, we are none of these things, but they are tools to help us to remember who we are at the core, which is these unlimited, infinite beings. And so I truly believe that it's our video game and we get to play around and we get to experience and explore different things. But I never like to land and stay at one place and say, this is it. This is the one all be all, because I feel like that's very constricting and limiting for us as human beings and as sovereign beings who can ultimately create whatever we want to create. But we've been taught and conditioned to believe the opposite, or we've been distracted by news, by whatever it is that keeps our attention on that instead of remembering who we are at the core. And when we really tap into that, we can play, like we can truly have freedom in our lives and play and create this beautiful, beautiful reality of whatever it is that we want to, because it's infinite. And so, I think that can be a difficult concept to really sit with and understand, but that's why I love human design so much and why I love talking about it, because it helps expand people to get them out of that smaller box that they're in, and it's going to put them in an even bigger box, and then eventually they're going to go and expand to another box. So it's again that stepping stone to help you expand and to grow. And so I'm always very, very clear with my clients. I'm like, take what you need from this, but don't ever let it become an identity for you, because then it creates gurus. It creates people, these gods that people follow. And, some people are just like, raw, unless you're listening to source material. Like, I'm like, that's okay. That's the experience that you came here to have. Beautiful. I'm going to go and explore everything. And, I could put it in human design language and say it's my 3536. It's the incarnation cross I'm on, whatever. But yeah, that's how I actually perceive reality and how I perceive and use human design.
That's really gorgeous. Absolutely love it. So, Nina, where can people find you if they want to learn more or if they want to just watch you or work with you?
Yeah, so YouTube, if you just search for Nina Elise, you're going to find a ton of human design videos. I speak mostly to my experience with human design. So a lot of aspects of my chart, sometimes mixed with gene keys as well. So a lot of manifestor, quad right, being an emotional authority is on there. A lot of experiential um, videos are on there. If you're new to human design or you want to dive a little bit deeper, you can always pull your chart for free on my website. It's nina-elise.com. And on there, if you are wanting to dive a little bit deeper and understand the language of human design, I have a free chart that goes deep into your specific chart. I also have a free inner child guide. So a lot of that inner child work that I was talking about earlier, I have that all in one place, and a guided meditation as well. That's for free on my website. So I'm actually in the process of like kind of burning a lot of my offers and things to the ground. You know, I have like hypnosis and EFT tapping and all of these different tools on my website that you can buy. Um, but I'm going to be shifting and changing that in the coming months. So not sure when this podcast is going to be released, but I have a lot of free things that are on my website to get started. If you want to go deeper into breath work or go deeper into your human design, you can obviously work with me with those one-off sessions or work with me long-term where I can take you through that whole ARC method that I talked about in this episode. So really beautiful process.
Love it. And of course, I will link all of this in the show notes so it's easy access for anybody who's listening. And yeah, I'm so grateful that you wanted to come on this podcast and have this conversation with me, Nina. I think it's going to be very impactful for a lot of people that are coming, new or old, to human design. There's a lot of wisdom and a lot of knowledge here that I think was very necessarily needed to be shared.
Yeah, thank you for initiating all of this. I've been watching you as well for a while on Instagram, and so I was so excited when you were like, "Manifestors unite!" I was like, "Me for sure. I want to talk," because we have very similar charts. Minus we just have two different defined pressure centers.
Yep. You got the head and I got the roots.
Yeah. But yeah, but I also love to, I'm like, I could talk for hours with you. You've got that 43-23, and that's where my split is. So I'm like, I could talk to you for weeks on end.
Well, we'll have to do it again soon.
Yes, definitely. Well, I appreciate you holding space and asking these really impactful questions, and I'm really excited to see it all come together.
Me too.